Welcome to this week's Bite Size. Since the start of March 2020, we as managers and leaders across the health and social care system have been making the most difficult decisions of our lives. It's not only the significance of the decisions that make them so difficult, it's also the pace and quantity of the decisions that those around us look to us to make. It's likely then that we may be experiencing what's called decision fatigue, because decisions require mental energy, and the more decisions we're required to make, the more our energy levels become depleted. This can lead us to a point when we feel unwilling or unable to make a decision. John Mallet referred to this during his leadership interview, and whilst I don't believe that life is simple enough for decisions to be wholly right or wrong, this adaptation of Teddy Roosevelt's quote reminds us that it's the making a decision that is the most important thing. During this bite size, we'll be exploring key things to consider when making decisions and some useful tools and approaches to support you in making the best decisions you can, given the situations you find yourself in. One of the first things to consider is the type of situation you're in, whilst remembering the ultimate reference point, or as Professor Stephen Peters calls it in his brilliant book, The Chimp Paradox, the Stone of Life. The first three truths of life are: life is not fair, the goalposts move, and there are no guarantees in life. Now, on that cheery yet realistic note, let's move on. As humans, we naturally seek simplicity, routine, and predictability. When we see a problem, we want to be able to make a clear decision to get to a straightforward solution. We already know, though, that the situations we face are not always simple. What we want to be able to do is make sense of the challenges we're facing and match the most appropriate leadership and decision-making approach to the needs of the situation. This is important because we're likely to have a default mode when it comes to making decisions, and as Bernard Baruch describes it, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. As this one-size-fits-all approach is likely to be ineffective, what we want is a way of taking a more agile approach to complex novel situations. The Cynefin framework can help us diagnose and categorise the situations we face as either simple, complicated, complex, or chaotic. Many of the tasks that we face, thank goodness, are simple, and we can successfully predict and navigate them with an established approach. So think about standard operating procedures, etc. Simple situations are where the relationship between cause and effect is obvious to all. Sadly, or excitingly, depending on your point of view, not everything works this way. So the next one is complicated. These are situations where the relationship between cause and effect requires analysis and/or the application of expert knowledge. Interestingly, this is the type of situation we probably encounter most frequently, so there's a chance that both as leaders and clinicians will already have some level of familiarity or comfort in this space. Complicated problems have an attributable cause and effect, and whilst there are challenges or situations that are solvable, the solution may lie outside of our field of expertise. So this would be when we call on experts, consultants, advisors, etc. to deliver solutions. So an example of that might be when you have IT problems, then you contact the IT service desk, or if you're having some staff management challenges, then you may request support from HR. The risk is that because we become used to navigating and making decisions in complicated situations, there can be a tendency to assume that there's always someone out there who has the answer or who can fix the problem. And COVID-19 has reminded us not every problem is like that, which brings us on to complex. Typically, complex problems have no clear relationship between cause and effect, or we only perceive the relationship in hindsight. If you found yourself thinking or saying, "I should have seen that," the likelihood is that you've encountered a complex problem where, with so many variables at play, it would have been impossible for you to see what was on the horizon. These situations require us to take a more experiential and iterative approach. So we talked about the mini PDSA cycles during the learning and looking forward bite size. While this can often lead to innovation, which we've certainly experienced through the pandemic, it can also result in frustration and impatience if we don't see the results we're aiming for quickly enough. This can tempt us into the more black and white thinking typical of an approach to simple situations, which can lead us to a sense of failure or blame. So finally, on to chaotic. Chaotic situations are unpredictable, abrupt, and cataclysmic. The sudden onset of COVID-19 was a chaotic event. Whilst the initial reaction to chaos is to immediately stop the bleeding, over time our goal is to move the situation from the chaotic domain to the complex one, where we can work with our teams to test new approaches and make decisions which will support us in identifying patterns that may help us to shape a path towards a successful outcome. If we want to get more comfortable with complexity, we'll want to take a few moments to reflect on which of these approaches feels most familiar or comfortable to us. Some of us tend to think almost exclusively in complex terms, even when situations don't require it, while others may oversimplify problems or lean towards the one-size-fits-all approach. Distinguishing the difference between simple and complex problems supports us in recognizing our preferences and habits and actively working toward developing others. Like scaffolding, every complex situation we experience will become a part of a framework that strengthens our ability to withstand future complexity, so that over time we become better able and more comfortable to make decisions in these situations. A framework like Cynefin increases our level of certainty around decision making by giving us a starting point for assessing the situation and identifying the kind of leadership and decision making approach that may be required. Even so, we may still feel under pressure whilst trying to make decisions. To enable us to manage that situation, it's useful to understand the factors likely to enhance or impair our decision making under pressure, as well as some specific techniques which can help. In Human Fallibility and Sequential Decision Making, Winston Coe recognised that when making decisions, perfect information is impossible and human fallibility is present. I suspect that neither of these statements surprises you, and yet I also suspect that you found yourself delaying making a decision until you get just a bit more information, or beating yourself up when hindsight shows you could have made a different or better decision. Building on that, it's reasonable to expect that when we're under pressure of time and resource constraints, fatigue and ethical complexity, making decisions and judgments becomes even more difficult, which is likely to impact the balance between our levels of thinking and feeling that we introduced in this psychological transition bite size. This is reinforced by studies from both the military and the police, which demonstrate the negative impacts once our heart rates pass 145 beats per minute. The guide from NHS People about making decisions under pressure says that other factors which negatively impact our decision making include a drop in judgment quality and productivity when we attempt to multitask, links between serotonin imbalance, whether that's through hunger, fatigue or natural light, results in rushed and less considered decisions. Pressure can make us more instinctive in our judgments, which can in turn mean that we have a greater susceptibility to unconscious biases. And when there's a high probability of dilemmas where personal values and available options are in conflict, this is perhaps the most significant for us in health and social care. In the current context, that's also going to impact our decision making. Now we can identify the different types of situations in which we'll be making decisions, so simple, complicated, complex or chaotic. And we've been reminded of some of the biology that can impact our decision making. Let's look at 3 things that will support us in making decisions and making them even more effectively. So the first one is about acknowledging the reality. Secondly, understanding whether a decision is reversible or irreversible, and then 4 powerful questions that we can ask ourselves. As the World Health Organization Regional Director for Europe put it, we have to humbly acknowledge that COVID-19 is a fast evolving situation. We may not always have the best evidence at hand on which to base our decisions, but we don't have the luxury of time to wait until better evidence becomes available. Which means that, as John Mallet said in his leadership interview, we as clinicians, managers and leaders will face situations where our best guess is better than no decision at all. Now, this might not feel comfortable or fair, and still that's the reality. And it reminds me of one of my favourite quotes that I try and remind myself of regularly, and it comes from the speaker and author Byron Katie, who says, "When you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time." It can be tempting to assume that waiting until we've got as much information as possible will help us make the best decisions. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it hampers our progress, and sometimes it can be damaging and potentially dangerous. Now, one approach used by Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, is based on asking ourselves whether the decision is reversible or irreversible. So if we think about reversible decisions, then we can make them fast and without perfect information, and we can be prepared to learn from our experience. It's often not sufficiently worth the additional time and energy required to gather more information in the pursuit of a flawless answer. Whilst it might make our decision 5% better, the extra time may result in us missing opportunities. Now, if it's an irreversible decision, what we'll want to do is slow down our decision-making process and ensure that we consider ample information and understand the situation as thoroughly as we can. Reversible situations are not an excuse for acting recklessly or being ill-informed. They're based on the belief that we'll want to adapt the framework of our decisions to the types of decisions we're making. Reversible decisions don't need to be made the same way as irreversible ones, and every decision we'll make will provide us with data which will support us in making even more effective decisions in the future. Contrary to what we may believe, we make most of our decisions at a subconscious or emotional level. The neural signals then travel from our heart to our brain, where we get to apply logic and justify the decision with our conscious mind. To support us through our decision making then, we'll want to become conscious of the subconscious thought patterns that might lead us to resist making decisions. This simple tool, you can see it says 4 powerful questions, supports us in uncovering potential resistance so we can make decisions more easily by exploring new options and potential consequences. They offer us a way for us to challenge our own thinking, uncover potentially limiting beliefs, and allow us to perceive our decision from different angles, providing greater clarity and certainty. Even better, they work equally well both inside and outside of work. So the questions are as follows, and where it shows an X, it represents the possibility that we're exploring. So the first question is, what will happen if I do X? Question 2, what won't happen if I do X? What will happen if I don't do X? And what won't happen if I don't do X? It works best when we ask the questions in this order and capture our responses on paper. After asking each one, we can go even deeper by asking ourselves, and what else? To uncover even more outcomes and possibilities. If we're deciding between more than one possibility, we can explore each of the 4 questions for each alternative. So as we explore our responses, it helps to imagine the outcome actually happening and then come up with ways to mitigate any potential risks. Finally, we can select the option that provides us with the greatest amount of certainty so that we can feel the highest degree of safety. By doing this, we'll feel more able to commit to our decisions because our conscious and our subconscious minds will be more aligned. So to the takeaways from this bite size then. Often the worst decision is no decision at all. Remember the first three truths of life. Life is not fair. The goalposts will change and there are no guarantees. Cynefin provides us with context, so whether we're making decisions in a simple, complicated, complex or chaotic situation, remembering that our heart rate impacts our performance, the usefulness of acknowledging reality, as you remember that reality wins only 100% of the time. Consider reversibility, as reversible and irreversible decisions need to be made differently. And then remember the 4 powerful questions which will support us in making the best decisions we can with the information we have at the time. So to support you in putting this learning into action, identify a decision you've been putting off. Consider it in relation to these tools and approaches. Make a decision and learn from it. As usual, here are the other sources of support. We really would value your thoughts and feedback on these bite size, so please do email us at hrservicesupport@mchc.nhs.uk and title your email bite size. Thank you, and I look forward to working with you next time.